Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Raghav Edara, and I'm from Lalaji Memorial Omega International School, Chennai, Tamil Nadu, in India. So I'm going to be trying to answer the knowledge question: Who has the ability to document history? So, a few weeks ago, I was reading an article that spoke about how most history is actually written by the winning side, and that contradicted my idea of history and quite a few of my friends' ideas of history. I decided to look at Indian culture and history and see if India had any such theories that were drafted by the people that ruled over India. And I came across the Aryan invasion theory. And I actually thought the Aryan invasion theory was true before. But after a little bit of research, I found that it's not actually true. I decided to further look into more studies and more historians' perspectives on this. I realized that it was indeed not true, and I would explore who has the ability to document history with real life examples, reasoning, and emotion. So, my claim is that victors are the only one who should be allowed to document history, and the counterclaim is victors are not the only ones who should be able to document history. So, so I'm going to be looking at how victors write history to suit their own needs and to favor their future endeavors and not actually write what the truth is. So, first, we're going to be having an introduction about what all this is about, and then an evaluation of different real life examples, and then a conclusion on who can document history. So first of all, the evidences I'm going to be using are historians' perspectives and philosophers' perspectives, biological evidence like DNA tests, and books and scripts. First of all, we're going to be going to the examples. So Indian civilization is at least 24,000 years old, and Indian chronology has been mutilated, vandalized, and trampled over by Western Indologists in order to prove the supremacy of Western civilization. In order to achieve concepts like biblical chronology and the Aryan invasion theory were introduced into the academia and they were not actually true. According to the biblical chronology, the world was created by God on 23rd February 4004 BCE and Noah's flood occurred in 3000 BCE. It said that all human civilization is supposed to have only started in the Noah's flood. When the Westerners first came to India, they were confronted by the advanced Indian calendar called Kali era, and it began in 3102 BCE, which was way before the Noah's flood occurred, which is way before which is way before 4004 BCE, and using the political supremacy of the church, which is superior to the Indian mythology at the time, they falsified the Indian chronology, saying it was untrue. Now we're going to be looking at the Aryan invasion theory. The Aryan invasion theory basically says it was basically put forward by Western scholars during the colonial age, and it says that the European or Central Asian race came to India, displacing the indigenous Indian people, and they're the people who actually inhabited India and civilized India, and they're the one who brought it up. And it was said by Sir Robert Eric Mortimer Wheeler, and he was a British person. And after looking into a little bit more of who he was, he was actually a general working in the British Army. And after that, I realized that there is a sort of bias. He had a bias, a preset bias that the British are better than the Indians, and that's why he introduced a theory favoring the British, not favoring the Indians. Now we're going to be looking at how methods and tools help us to identify that the Aryan invasion theory was not actually true. So, as I already said, the winning side documented that the Aryan invasion theory occurred, but DNA results in a paper published called The Cell showed that the people from Indus Valley had no steppe DNA, no DNA from the European side, and they had some Iranian farm-related DNA and some DNA from South India, but no sort of DNA of the Europeans. That showed that the claims of the Aryan invasion theory by Sir Robert Eric Mortimer Wheeler were actually false. False. Another thing that falsified the theory was language. The Aryan invasion theory also states that Indian languages like Sanskrit were made outside India and just brought to India and unpacked by the so-called Aryans. However, in Sanskrit languages, there are retroflex consonants that are very similar to the retroflex consonants in Vedic languages. And these Vedic languages were made in India by the earlier Indians, by the indigenous communities. And these retroflex consonants are not found in any other Indo-European languages, showing that Sanskrit was actually made by Indians and it was derived from ancient Vedas, again disproving the Aryan invasion theory. Now I'm going to be further analyzing perspectives of different philosophers and different other occurrences that occurred to show that the people who won, or the people who were superior, actually documented history to favor them or to favor their side. So Herbert Marshall McLuhan is a Canadian philosopher. You might have heard of him. So he said that the hand that wrote a page built a city. Or in other words, he's basically trying to say that the hand or the person or the historian who just wrote a page of history actually built a city. Even though the historian, he just imagined and with his creativity, he created up history to favor his side, it actually built up the city. It actually had lots of influences on people's life, which shows that the more powerful side actually writes history, and that history is actually built up, even though it's not actually true, like how we saw in the Aryan invasion theory. Another example is Alexander the Great. You must have heard of him. He came to India, and in the Battle of Hydaspes, which is basically a battle that he fought with along with other Indian kings, along with another Indian king, to defeat a local king called Porus, also known as Purusottama, but gave the kingdom back because he was supposedly impressed by their efforts, which basically doesn't make any sense because Alexander the Great took a lot of his wealth that he gained, he gave it to another Indian king, he used that Indian king's his cavalry, and he used his own army and military powers, and then he tried to attack Porus. And he basically, it's said that in history that he won, but he apparently gave back the kingdom because he was impressed by their efforts. Well, Alexander was well aware that the military of Porus was much mightier than his. He had 200 war elephants, 3,000 cavalry, 1,000 chariots, and almost 30,000 foot soldiers, which were much more strong than 40,000 of his army, 40,000 of his army put together with another king's army. So he'd apparently won, which makes no sense. The truth is, he actually didn't. But because he was the more powerful side, and because he wanted them to believe that they could have actually taken over India before, but they're only coming to take it over now, he created history that he actually won, and he felt bad for them, and he gave them back the side, which makes no sense at all. Hence, the claim that victors are only ones who should document history is disproved, since the perspectives of victors are often self-promotional, and that the perspectives of different people around the world, different people should be taken into consideration in making history. The counterclaim is hence proved, and everyone's perspectives must be respected and taken into consideration. However, just as scientists are, and just as when one new discovery comes that disproves the old discovery, we don't abandon the old scientist and say he's wrong and take back his awards. Instead, because we have better methods and tools, and because we have a more better understanding of the world now, that's how we're able to rewrite history. And just like sciences, history cannot be fixed. It's continuously rewritten to make it more and more accurate. The older historians' perspectives are not incorrect, bearing in mind that they didn't have all today's scientific methods and tools to write the history. They made it from their creativity, imagination, and what they heard, while they weren't aware of DNA testing and other things. The conclusion is that since there happens to be an inevitable bias in the production of knowledge, various perspectives must be taken into consideration before documented history, not only of the victors or the powerful group. Thank you. If anyone has any questions now, I'll be willing to answer them.
Thank you, by the way. It was a great presentation and great usual PowerPoints. So any questions? Maybe we can wait for a while to make them think, because it was a huge and big data for us. And by the way, could you show the your argument again so they may think of them? So you said counterclaim and claim. If you can share with us, we may think of it. Actually, I can ask a question. So you said victors are the only ones who should be allowed to document history. So actually, here is the point. Actually, they have that power too. So writing history is that you have the power and you use it that way. So if someone has the power, he also writes its own history. And victors are not the only ones who should be able to document history. So it's inevitable, I think. I mean, because again and again, they have power. But when you look at this the internet, the technology, what do you think of it? I mean, now there is no power. Everyone can write its own history. So what do you think about this argument in terms of 2020?
Well, in the olden days, there wasn't internet, and most of the countries were based on one leader. Like one country would take over other countries, and that country would lead over this country. And the people who weren't in the leading side, or the people who are on the lower side, or who actually worked and who are not part of the government, or who are not part of the higher side, they weren't able to express their views. They weren't able to document their views. But now, since there's the internet and since there's freedom of speech, people are able to actually express their views. And only now, because people are actually expressing their views, we actually found out that the previous history or the past history was not actually accurate. And that's how now we're able to rewrite history to make it more and more accurate. But in the olden days, there was no sort of freedom of speech or freedom of expression, which didn't allow people who are not in power to express history. And that's why history in the past was only for those in power, but now it's not anymore. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So, by the way, we have 5 minutes, I think. Did you see it? So, any questions? Any other questions?
Excuse me, I have a question. Is it possible for both sides to coexist in making or documenting history, since both sides can have bias towards their own side?
Yeah, so my perspective is that both sides can exist in documenting history. And as I said in the conclusion, it's important that different perspectives are taken, and that's documented as history, not only the more powerful side or the side that has more power. So I believe that it's possible that both sides' history are taken, but there are claims that when both sides' history is taken, if one side has opposing views to the other side, then that might not actually be counted as history. I'm just giving an example. So if two countries have war and one country says they won and that's their history, and the other country says they won and that's their history, both countries say that both of them won. At that point, both countries can't actually win. And if you actually document that both countries won in the history, then that won't be actually as history, because that's just everyone saying their own thing. But I also agree with you that if only one side documents their history, there'll always be a bias. So it is important that different perspectives are taken into consideration, but it might not always be possible. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
So if there is no question, maybe we can finish. Raghav, what you think? Okay, so
Yeah, sure.
before finishing, I really appreciate your effort as a philosophy teacher in IBY1 College. I really like what you did here. I really appreciate your teachers. So great. So thank you for everything. And so see you if we finish, if you don't have any questions.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We should thank you for this great.
Yeah, we should be the ones to thank you.
You're welcome.
So we can wait for 3 minutes if somebody has a question, and then we can leave maybe Raghav.
Raghav, can I ask you a question? Like, how do you compare the methodologies used in history with any other area of knowledge? For example, natural sciences? Did you hear me?
Okay.
Or should I?
So yeah. The question was, how do you compare the methodology used in history with that of natural sciences, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So the tools used in history, the methodology and tools used in history are actually kind of based off the tools used in natural sciences, and they're quite interdisciplinary actually. So like when in history they wanted to use methods and tools to find out about the DNA, they actually use DNA testing, which is quite related to biology. So they use the methods and tools, they are interconnected, but some methods and tools used in history, such as archaeology and geography, which involves looking at symbols made on walls or carvings or paintings, that methodology used in history might actually be quite different from the methods and tools used in natural sciences, which are more based on technology. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. I was just talking about, earlier days, what was the main tool used for writing history.